Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Terry in 10 minutes. So we're going to be talking about how do we find discriminant and the nature of a quadratic equation. If you've not subscribed, I don't know what you're waiting for. Click the notification bell so that when I post new videos, you'll be the first person to know. So we're going to go straight into this. Please try as much as possible to review the previous video. We've talked about especially the formula method, all right? So try as much as possible to review, and you could have seen by now is that the general expression of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. We said this several times already. And also, you need to review how to solve quadratic equation using the formula. So we've talked about minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by what? 2a. Okay, so let's get to it. So try as much as possible to review how to use the formula, because we're going to talk about a concept from the formula in finding the discriminant. So basically, when we talk about a discriminant of a quadratic equation, it means that the discriminant of a quadratic uses the coefficient of the equation, that is the a, b, and c, to determine the type or nature of the solutions, but not for finding them. It's just to know what type and the nature they are. And this is different from the roots, okay? So discriminant is different from the roots. So the root is basically, so this is different from the roots. So if you're talking about the roots, you're talking about, it refers to the solution itself. Does that make sense? Discriminant is just determining the type and or nature, while the root is just determining or finding the solution itself, okay? I know that some of you are writing as well, so I'm going to write it so that you can take notes as well. So if I talk about the discriminant, okay, so let me put this in a box, so just for emphasis. So the discriminant of a quadratic equation so it uses the coefficient. So remember, we talked about the coefficient, the A, B, C. The A, if you remember, these are the coefficients. So the A, which is the quadratic coefficient, the B, the linear coefficient, and the C, which is the free term, okay? So it uses the coefficients of the equation. So that means I'm referring to the A, B, and C, okay? To determine the type or nature. All right, so we use the discriminant to find the type or the nature of the solutions, okay? So you just tell you the type or nature of the solution, but not the solution itself. So it's very key, all right? But not, all right? So it does not tell you or how to, but not tell you what is the solution. Is that okay? It just helps you to tell you the type and the nature, but it does not give you the solution. Is that okay? Now, this is completely different from the roots, okay? Now, when we talk about roots, okay, roots of a quadratic equation is the solution itself. Is that okay? So when we were solving the previous video, we used the formula method, completing the square method, factorization. Now, these methods are to find the solution itself, okay? So the root refers, okay? So this refers to the solution itself. Is that okay? So this is different. So the solution of a quadratic equation is called the root. Okay? So you need to keep that in mind. So please try as much as possible to review the previous video series so that you can understand that how to find the root. But in this case, we're just looking for the discriminant, all right? So now the discriminant is a part of the quadratic formula, but it's the part that just underneath the quadratic root symbol. So if you remember the quadratic formula, it was minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by what? 2a. So the discriminant is this part here, this part here, this b squared minus 4ac. So that means the discriminant, so when you hear discriminant in quadratic equation, the discriminant is the what? B squared minus what? 4ac. All right. So that means I can rewrite the discriminant. Usually people write it as d, is the b squared minus 4ac. So I can write the quadratic formula as b minus b plus or minus square root of d divided by what? 2a, because the discriminant is what? B squared minus 4ac. Now, the value that we'll get from this b squared minus 4ac is very critical. So it tells us two things. It tells us the nature of the roots or the types of roots, as well as we can also predict the graph. Is that okay? So there are two major information, all right? So let me just say why discriminant, all right? So the major information, the major information we have there is that we can get is number one, it will tell us the nature or type of roots. Okay, we're going to tell us the nature or type of roots. So like I said, some textbook, we call it solutions, all right? It's exactly the same thing. Then number two, it's going to help us to predict the graph. So you can predict the graph based on the discriminant. We'll talk about this when we get to quadratic linear equations, okay? So why discriminant? It tells us first the nature or the type of roots or solution and helps us predict the graph. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to draw a table to give a summary of all the possible natures and values you can get. So based on what I've just said, if you look at this, that means the values or the solution you get from the value of the discriminant, we can tell you the nature or the type of root. So that means b squared minus 4ac, you can solve it, and your answer could be 0. If you have 0, what does that mean? You can solve it, and your answer could be positive. If it's positive, what does that mean? So when it's positive, we mean that it's greater than what? 0. Or you could solve it, and this is 0, it means it's equal to 0, and it could be what? Negative. And if it's negative, it means that it's what? Less than what? 0. What does that imply? So because this is what we call the discriminant, all right? So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try to do a table so that we can now talk about when the discriminant is 0, what does that imply? When it's positive or when it's what? Negative. So the first thing first, I'm going to go to the next slide and try as much as possible to draw a table there. So let's draw a table. So I'm going to draw a table to make it easy. So I'm going to put on this column, I'm going to put discriminant. All right. I'll put it like this. Then I'm going to, on the other part, I'm going to write the nature. Okay. All right. So remember, I told you that it helps us to determine the nature and we can predict the graph. So we're going to talk about this sometime. Okay. We're going to talk about sketching down the series. All right. So we talk about the nature and also going to talk about what? The graph itself. So remember, discriminant can help you to predict the nature and the graph. So we're going to start with number 1. So when the discriminant, which is equal to b squared minus 4ac, is equal to 0. So that means the answer D is equal to 0. So remember I told you the first thing, it could be 0, it could be greater than 0, it could be less than 0. So when you solve, we'll start solving very soon in the next video, and you find out that your D is greater than 0, it means that you're going to have real and equal roots. So the key thing is that it's going to be real and equal roots. So what happens here is that you're going to have only one answer. You have only one answer. You're going to have only one answer twice. Okay? So when you solve it, you have only one answer twice. And when you try to draw the graph for a quadratic equation that is D is equal to 0, you notice that the graph will only touch the x-axis at only one point. So the graph will touch the x-axis. Okay, at only one point. So that means when you see the graph can look like something like this. You just touch it at one point like this, okay? Or you could touch it at something like this. Or it could be anyhow you want to look at it, but you see, it will just touch it at one point, nothing. So when you're touching it, you're just going to touch the x-axis at one. Remember, this is the x and this is the what? Y. So you can touch it at just one point. Now, but what happens now is the second part that I want to talk about. So what about if the discriminant is greater than 0? So that means the d, which is the b squared minus 4ac, you solved it and your answer is greater than 0. So that means it's positive. Is that making sense? It's positive, it's greater than 0. What will happen is that you notice when you solve it, you notice that your answer is going to be 2 real and distinct what? Roots. So it's going to be 2 real and distinct what? Roots. Remember, if it's equal to 0, it's real and equal. But if it's greater than 0, it's going to be 2 real and distinct. So here, you're going to have 2 different answers when you solve, okay? You're going to have 2 different answers. Okay? Here, you're going to have 1 answer, but it's going to be twice. But here, you're going to have 2 different answers. So, and this means that it crosses the x-axis at 2 different points. So that means it crosses the x-axis at 2 different points. Okay? So that means if you draw the graph for this, you will notice that the graph will look like this. Are you seeing it? It's crossing here and here. Or you can also draw the graph. It can be like this, crossing here and here. Or anyhow you want to draw it, or it could be like this, here and there. Are you seeing it? So it could be anything. It could be anything. The graph could look anyhow. But the only key thing that you notice is that when it's crossing the x-axis, so this is the x and this is the y, okay? This is the x-axis, this is the x-axis, and that is the y-axis, all right? This is the y-axis. So what you notice is that when it's crossing the x and the y, it's crossing at 2 different points, okay? Now, finally, the third one is what happens when the discriminant, which is the b squared minus 4ac, is less than 0. Now, when it's less than 0, that means we're saying that when you solved it, your answer was what? Negative. Now, when it's negative, it means that there was no real roots. No real roots, all right? So no real roots, but complex solutions, all right? So complex what? Solutions. We're going to talk about this when we get to complex numbers. Is that okay? So there's a way of solving when the discriminant is negative. Talk about that when we get to complex numbers. So that means if there's no real root, so in this case, when you solve it, there'll be no real roots, but the answer you're going to get will be imaginary root. So that means you can say there'll be no real roots, okay, but imaginary. So the key word here is imaginary. We'll talk about this when we get to complex numbers. So imaginary what? Roots. Okay. So, but the thing about this is that when you now try to draw the graph for when it's less than 0, you will notice that it will not what? It does not touch or crosses the x-axis, but it's either entirely above or below. So that means basically it does not touch or crosses the x-axis. Okay, so remember in all these scenarios, it was either touching at 1 point, okay, just 1 point, or 2 points. But in this case, it's not going to touch the x-axis at all. but it will be completely, okay? It will be completely above or below the x-axis. So that means if you draw the graph, it will look like this. It's above or it's below, or anyhow you want to draw the graph, you'll see that it will never what? Touch the x-axis. So that means completely above and below. This is very important. The reason why I'm trying to stress this and take my time to go through this is because when we now get to sketching of graph, this is very important. Sketching of graph or quadratic inequalities. It's very important to know the discriminant so you can also predict how the answer should look like. All right. So I'm going to go to the next board, and we're going to talk about what are the rules. So how do you now find the discriminant for each of this? Okay. How do you now find the discriminant? So how do you find it? So like we've talked about, discriminants, it could be greater than 0, less than 0, and equal to 0. And the formula for discriminant, like I said, is b squared minus 4ac. So that means the first thing you need to find, you need to first know the value of your a, b, and c, okay? So let's quickly go there. So we're going to write the 3 rules for finding. What are the 3 rules for finding discriminants of a quadratic equation? Okay, what are the 3 rules for finding the discriminant of a quadratic equation? So the first thing, you need to first find the values of a, b, and c, all right? So you have to find the values of a, b, and c. Number 2, after finding the values of a, b, and c, you then have to substitute step 1. So the answer you get from step 1 into the formula. So as you know, the formula for the discriminant is b squared minus what? 4ac. Then when you're done with that, you then what? Simplify. So that means you simplify and get the final answer. But same thing, it's exactly the same thing when you want to get for the nature. It's just that instead of simplifying, you're going to analyze. So the 3 rules for finding what? Nature. So if the question is asking you to find the nature, so if it's finding the nature, the first one was we're finding the discriminant. But if it's finding the nature, the same thing. Number 1, you're going to find the values of a, b, and c. Okay, so finding nature, finding discriminant. If it's finding the same thing, you find a and c. Number 2, the same thing. You substitute your answer from step 1 into the formula. Okay, into the formula. And you know the formula as well is b squared minus what? 4ac. Okay, you substitute into the formula b squared minus 4ac. Now, when you substitute it and you get your answer, the next thing then you need to analyze. So remember, you need to analyze if your answer was 0. If you solve this and your answer was 0, what does that mean? It means that it's real and equal roots. And when you draw the graph, it's only going to touch the graph, the x-axis at one point. If you solve it and your answer is positive, what does that mean? It means that it's 2 real roots, 2 real and distinct what? Roots. And when you draw the graph, it's going to cross the x-axis at 2 different what? Points. And also when you substitute and your answer is negative. So when it's negative, it means that there's no real root, but complex solutions, and it's going to be completely above or below the x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, so I will not take it longer than this. So this is the concept of discriminant. How do you find a discriminant? All right, so it's very important to know that the discriminant gives you the nature, and you tend to predict the graph. And there are 3 possible answers you can get. You can either get 0, you can get positive or you can get negative. And when it's positive, negative, what it implies, and the rest of it. So the next video, we're gonna solve some examples on finding discriminants, all right? So that this video will not be long. So we're gonna see how we're gonna solve some examples and see how do we apply what we just talked about. So you can go back, rewatch this video, try as much as possible to understand it, take notes of it, and then we'll move on before you meet me in the next video where we'll talk about how to solve some questions on this, all right? So like I always say, if you have questions, feel free to send me an email or you can stop me anywhere and we can discuss about it. All right, so I'm going to see you soon. See you soon.